Deepak Chopra once said, every time you are tempted to react in the same old way, ask if you want to be a prisoner of the past or a pioneer of the future. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner, Ike Allen, and I are the co-owners of Avaya University. Thanks so much for joining us. In this event, we are talking with some incredible fellow experts. We're talking with therapists, psychologists, doctors, best-selling authors, and more, who are here to help provide you with tools and strategies to help you experience greater happiness, peace, and joy in your life. Today, our guest, I am super excited about. She's going to talk with us about bringing warm comfort to the cold roots of our anxiety and depression. So please welcome Sarah Peyton. Hi there.
Hi, Andy. Such a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine, and I'm so excited to talk with you about this topic. And I want to tell everyone a little bit about you first, in case they aren't familiar with your work. So Sarah is a certified trainer of nonviolent communication and neuroscience educator. She integrates brain science and the use of resonant language to heal trauma. She brings together depth work and self-compassion that integrate interpersonal neurobiology with the transformative potential of nonviolent communications empathy. She teaches and lectures internationally, and she is also the author of the book, Your Resonant Self, Guided Meditations and Exercises to Engage Your Brain's Capacity for Healing. So Sarah, let's dive into this topic of our cold roots of anxiety and depression. What are our cold roots of anxiety and depression?
Well, what we need to understand more than anything else with both anxiety and depression is that when human beings do not have warm accompaniment, when they are not understood by the people around them and welcomed, then their nervous systems actually go a little haywire. And things kind of get lodged in our bodies. Messages become lodged in our bodies that are never received by our in a way, by our brains, by our language, by our relational space. So for human beings, we're exquisitely social. We live in a world where we're told, oh, you're supposed to, take care of yourself. You need to be self-sufficient. Don't pick the baby up when she cries. All kinds of messages like this that tell us that we are atomized, siloed individuals that are supposed to be doing it by ourselves. But in actual fact, our entire neurobiology is set up for warm relationship. We even have receptors in our skin that are especially devoted to being able to feel body warmth from other humans. These are not receptors that are supposed to track pain or unpleasant heat. These are receptors that are looking for warm, comforting, nurturing heat. And this is one of the reasons that we use the word warm to talk about emotional warmth, because our bodies really like it. Now, at the same time, of course, we may have had many experiences of human beings not being safe enough to get close to, and if you're feeling that there's body heat around you, you most likely might be in danger. So we need to be gentle with ourselves with this. We're not like, Sarah, you have to be a social animal. If Sarah has had a lot of trauma with humans, she might rather prefer to be social with horses or trees. Yeah. But the reason that we are talking about the cold roots of anxiety and depression is because when human beings have experiences and they aren't accompanied, they just stay in us. And the thing about both anxiety and depression is how long they tend to persist, that we can kind of have experiences of bumping into them and then coming out. But for many, many people, this is a decades-long journey. This journey of trying to figure out, okay, I've got some anxiety. I feel it all the time. What do I do with it? I've got some depression. It's hard for me to move. It's hard for me to take action. How do I begin to acknowledge it and deal with it? And in both of these cases, we're touching something that doesn't get addressed very often in neuroscience, and doesn't get addressed very often in popular psychology either. And that is the way that nervous systems respond to aloneness, to being lonely, and to being alone with difficult things. Not aloneness like solitary beauty, meditation, sweetness, wonder, but those moments when aloneness is difficult. Now, we're mammals, Baby mammals, when they're separated from their mothers, go into an alarm state. They don't they don't actually go into a fear state. They don't actually go into an anger state, which are the types of emotion that we name most often when we're talking about our nervous system. When we're talking about our nervous system, we most often say fight, flight, freeze. Fight, anger, flight, fear, freeze, immobilization. We don't say fight, flight, and alarmed aloneness and freeze.
Mm.
It's like we live in a world that uh, uh, that's leaving out one of the most important states for humans.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't know we can be in a state of alarmed aloneness, which can be the cold root, particularly of anxiety, then we don't ever get to name it and we don't ever get to come out of it. Because the there are circuits that run from the body and our emotions up into our brain. And when, like, if you and I are connected, I'm like, Andy really gets this, then there'll be a relief in my body. Yes, I've been understood. But
Mm-hmm.
if I'm carrying an alarmed aloneness that I don't even know about enough to be able to bring it out for us to hold together, then it just will stay. So this is one of the cold roots of anxiety. I'll just pause there, see how you're
Mm-hmm.
doing.
Yeah, so I'd love it if you could give our listeners, our watchers, maybe some examples of what does that alarmed aloneness look like for people? Like, can you touch on that? Like, so I'm having a hard time trying to figure out like when I've experienced that. So, any examples you
Yeah,
could share?
yeah, of course. So let's say, I mean, this is one of the things that can happen to us even as adults. We're walking down a city street, and we get a little too close to the curb, or there's a fault in the sidewalk, and we step sideways on our ankle, and we actually fall.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's very embarrassing. It's embarrassing to be an adult who has fallen. And so we'll very quickly try to pick ourselves up and pretend it didn't happen. People will even come and say, "Do you need some help? Are you okay?" And we'll be like, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine." But inside of us, there's a spike of an experience of intense loneliness, of not in that moment having anybody with us. You know, if we're with somebody, then they pick us up, they're trusted, there's warmth, there's reassurance, they tease us maybe a little bit, we laugh a little bit. There's a recovery that happens that often isn't available to us in our everyday lives. That's something very small, but we can use bigger things. We can use an experience of seeing a play that we find absolutely distressing. Everybody else that we go to the play with loves the play, but here there were things about it that just really disturbed us. Nobody else appears to be disturbed at all. And so we're separated from our community by having a very different emotional experience, and there's nobody who's catching us.
Mm-hmm.
And inside of our nervous system, there's a spike of cortisol, disquiet, and kind of a seed of helplessness, because we experience something different than our little community, and so we're completely alone with it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that happen those are tiny adult things that might happen. If we're looking at it in its purest form, it's like a baby and their mom disappears and the baby begins to cry. Baby's like, "Where is my mother?" Or for more intensity for us as adults, if we think about heartbreak or the loss of a romantic partner or the death of a beloved person or friend, then and I don't know if you've ever had the experience of losing someone to death, and then you think you see them in the world. You're like, there, maybe, or you hear a voice that's like theirs, and your system goes on alert, looking for the person that we've lost. Is this starting to make a little more
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And all of those, though, all of those examples you've just shared now, I totally can relate to every single one of those. And I'm sure a lot of people watching can as well. So thank you. I appreciate that to get a little better understanding of that state. So I think that your work states, and maybe statistics states this too, right? That anxiety and depression overlap in 50% of cases. So people are suffering from both of them at the same time. What do you see are like really the differences between the two? Are they more similar than they are different?
Very good question. And this is something that I actually walk around thinking about the ways that anxiety and depression kind of fit together like a hand and a glove for many people. It's not for everybody. Some people just have anxiety, some people just have depression, but the research shows that in 50% of the cases we'll have both of them. And I think that this speaks to us about the terrible loneliness that is inherent in depression, and the way in which we'll have that experience of losing our life energy and sinking down into those places that are so familiar to those of us who have lived through depressive episodes. And simultaneously, there's this terrible sense that no one could understand us, that our pain is an overwhelming burden, that we shouldn't talk about it, and that there's absolutely no way that anyone could really accompany us in it.
Mm.
And so then there's an accompanying alarmed aloneness that's connected with the depression. Now, there's a beautiful body of work that was done by an American emotions researcher whose name was Jaak Panksepp, who, um, who looked at anxiety in mammals. And what he discovered was that the anxiety could be on the fear circuit, but it could also be on the alarmed aloneness circuit. That we actually have in our brains and in our bodies paths of neural tissue that the energy and information travel upon when we are anxious. But we can't tell from body sensation whether we're anxious from fear or whether we're anxious from alarmed aloneness. Since we never talk about alarmed aloneness, everybody's trying to figure out, what am I afraid of? How is my fear playing a role here? Or we'll say to ourselves, Sarah, do you need acknowledgement that you are anxious? And Sarah says, well, yeah, I do, but that's not helping. Of course, everybody knows I'm anxious. Or, Sarah, do you need acknowledgement that you are depressed? And you're like, well, yeah, obviously I'm depressed. But when we begin to touch the actual named emotions and circuits, we respond a little bit differently. So if I'm anxious and I say, do I need acknowledgement that I am experiencing a great deal of alarmed aloneness right now? Then there's a different kind of settling, because I'm actually touching the message that's coming from my body. Or do I need acknowledgement that there's something about future events that's got me in a state of terror? Do I know I'm going to be doing a podcast, and is it a little scary? Is that bubbling anxiety need to be held as fear, and to be held with warmth and understanding as fear, or is there alarmed aloneness? It's a very interesting question to begin to ask. There are two other states that Jaak Panksepp didn't touch on that also are very important to understand anxiety. One of them is the experience of our body being out of homeostasis.
Mm.
So we all have what's called an endocannabinoid system. Lots of people now are smoking marijuana or taking marijuana to help with different kinds of mental experiences like anxiety and depression. And those substances are actually trying to do the job that our internal cannabinoid system is supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
There are endocannabinoid receptors in almost every tissue in our body, and they're all devoted to health and well-being, to homeostasis. And when our body gets out of whack, then we can feel anxious as well. And then it's not the fear circuit, it's not the alarmed aloneness circuit, it's something is awry in the balance of our body.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another one. And then the fourth that I've found with research is when we're torn between two authorities, both of whom we value the opinion of.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised in a funny alternate religion, and I never think about it, but I read this research and I was talking to a group of people about it, and I was like, okay, how am I torn between two authorities? And I was like, oh, this funny religion I was raised in, modern Western medicine and science. Oh, I can feel this tornness in my body, and I named it, and there was a kind of an anxiety that just subsided.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've mentioned that a couple times, right? It's naming it, right? And
Yeah.
the power of being able to just acknowledge the feeling of alarmed loneliness or that, yes, being torn between
Yeah.
two authorities. I think
Yeah.
that is a super powerful thing. What other, like, what suggestions or tools or tips do you have for people in I want to ask you about both, specifically anxiety and depression? Any, you can start on either one, like
Sure, sure.
ways to
Although
help.
I talked a little bit about our anxiety, but I didn't put
Mhm.
the depression into the
All
picture
right,
of the
we'll put
circuits.
that in there first.
Yes, so I'll put it in first. One of the circuits that we have is the seeking circuit. This is also from Jaak Panksepp. It's the circuit where we get things done. And when that circuit is blocked, then mammals of all kinds, not just humans, first experience frustration, and then they might take a little side journey to rage because their life energy and their progress and their path is blocked. And then they'll go to helplessness, and then they'll go to despair, and then they'll go to depression. So our depression appears to be deeply connected with the blockage of our seeking circuit. So
Mm,
it's an essentially different, it's sort of a different emotional state animal than anxiety. But as we said, they do overlap. But both of them can be, both of these conditions can be found in this picture of our circuits. So one of the things that we most need is to be able to move, to be able to take action and see results in our life.
mm,
Even just little actions and little results. Some people have spoken about the experience of getting a really good vacuum when they were depressed and beginning
mm.
to vacuum and then seeing that they had picked up, it's like a direct antidote to the experience of having no effect in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But and as I say, no effect in the world, I'm imagining that some people are going, oh, no effect in the world, alarmed aloneness, these things can
Right.
come together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's beautiful right there. That is a beautiful connection. Yeah, like the I relate a little bit more to anxiety personally than depression, and so I see that with the depression, though, absolutely, that not being able to, or not having the experience of affecting the world, right?
Mhm.
Doing something that creates a result. And I love
Yeah.
the vacuum analogy. I can totally relate to that because I get great joy out of, like, wow, look at
Yeah.
all that dog hair that got sucked up, and
Yeah,
woohoo.
exactly.
That's
Exactly.
beautiful.
These little things that we do. Some people talk about how the more divorced we become from our hands and our hands doing work in the world, the more depression rises. So I think that's also a very,
Mm-hmm.
considering how much of a link there appears to be between the seeking circuit and its blockage and depression. That
Mm-hmm.
seems very important to me.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Thank you. That is something I haven't heard of yet in this series, and that there's like probably my biggest aha moment taking away is that connection between the seeking circuit and depression. I think that's just an awesome way of looking at it. So now, will you share any kind of strategies or tools or anything to help people with both anxiety and depression? Obviously with depression, right? It might be as simple as getting that vacuum and and cleaning off even one area, right? Or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, or finding, yeah, making something small that you can
Mhm.
take pleasure in. But really, what's most important is beginning, and it's most radical, beginning to create a warm holding of the self.
Mm,
Now, we all have the machinery, so to speak. We all have the neural circuitry it's always so odd to talk about the brain in terms of mechanistic metaphors. So I'll go to plants. We've all got the tendrils of permaculture garden that can possibly be nurtured to hold us. But if we've never ourselves experienced being held with warm resonance, then our brains actually don't even know how to
Mm,
turn toward us with warmth and hold us.
right.
We don't even realize that it's possible.
Mm,
No one, and we live in this world where, there's this fight, flight, freeze, and no alarmed aloneness named anywhere. We live in this world where nobody really models it for us either. I
mm,
mean, if I think about my mom, my mom believed she was not okay, and she survived by not thinking about that. And there's a similar way that's how my dad survived. They were both depression babies. I mean, they had more important things to to think about besides personal growth and transformation. They were
right.
trying
Yeah.
to make sure there was enough food.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Depression based on not having food on the table, and
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
From the Great Economic
Mhm.
Depression. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So, we live in a world where there's not a lot of modeling of what is it like to be warm and resonant with ourselves.
Mhm.
So there's an entire path of awakening the the tendrils that will reach from the part of us that can be intentional, that will reach in and hold our own selves, like to reach into our baby self and hold her or him or them. This sense of the possibility of warmth. And we can we usually have to grow these neurons. It's
Mhm.
often there are, when people begin to work with this, like if somebody hears this interview and they get excited and they're like, growing my neurons of warmth, what can I do? And they begin to follow this path, um, then uh, if there's a bump at about 8 months where they go, oh, holding the self with warmth, I'm starting to understand what that might mean. And
Mhm.
there's another bump at about 3 years where they go, oh, holding the self with warmth, I can do it when I'm intentional, but now I'm starting to notice that most of the time, unless I intentionally awaken and turn toward myself with these sweet neurons, I am just cold to myself.
Mm,
And this is that voice, that self critical voice that's running within us all the time as we start to hear it. That's the voice of how we're automatically holding ourselves. Sarah, how could you be so stupid? What do you think you're doing? People don't want to listen to you. You shouldn't speak. There's like a whole litany of from simple, like neutral voice all the way up to actively cruel and self-loathing. And the more we have self-loathing, the more trauma we've lived through.
mm,
So this is another piece of the puzzle with both anxiety and depression. How much trauma have we lived through?
right.
And so when you're asking about strategies, some of the strategies are, you can get the book Your Resonant Self, which takes you through everything we've been talking about in much greater detail. But you also don't even have to spend any money at all. There's a free meditation series that you'd be
Mm,
able to access, that's on the website yourresonantself.com. um, and you can just, people begin to listen to these meditations every day as a way to begin to awaken the sensation of being warm with ourselves, the sensation of saying to ourselves, you make sense. And there's wonderful research that shows that when we actually use our own names, when we're
mm,
being warm with ourselves, we are starting to differentiate between the part of our brain that's capable of bringing the warmth and the part of our brain that needs the warmth. It's like if I say, Sarah, Do you need a little acknowledgement that it's fun to be on the call with Andy,
Mhm.
and it's really exciting, and there's this wonderful imagining of the people that might get this and go, oh, this will help me. And so when I say that, when I use my own name, there's a perking up of the inner self in response.
Mm.
So these are the kinds of things that we can begin to do. We can begin to do daily guided meditations that are focused on this. We learn to use our own name when we talk to ourselves. Start to identify what kind of language, because if we tell ourselves what to do, that's not being warm and resonant with ourselves.
Mm. Right. I noticed like you're asking yourself questions as opposed to like
Yeah.
telling you do this or don't or whatever. You're like, oh, Sarah, do you need some acknowledgement for the excitement or the
Yeah.
whatever? So like asking yourself questions and
Yeah.
inquiring in a loving way. I love that.
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
feel that. I could feel that, right? Like warmth and lovingness towards yourself when you use your name. I think
Yeah.
that's a really beautiful example.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are some of the starting points. And to acknowledge, I think, with depression, to begin to develop the capacity to very gently sit with ourselves and to say, oh, of course you don't have any energy. Just like, because of course with depression, there can be those terrible spikes of fear that it'll never lift, fear that we'll just sort of melt into nothingness, fear that we'll become homeless because we can't function. There are so many fears that come with the way that depression debilitates us. And, um, and, and we need to develop the resilience to be able to go, of course. And it's even sweeter to develop the resilience to say, of course you're exhausted. And of course you're wiped out. Let's just remember what happened in the couple of years before the depression hit. Let's name the blows and blocks that our body has lived through. Just so that and this is a way of making sense of our lives, not in a self pitying way, not in a victim way, but in a gentle warmth and factually based acknowledgement of the hits and the way they impact human nervous systems.
Mm,
It's a
yeah.
very, yeah.
So here's a question that I'm curious about. Like in your experience in your work, are depression and anxiety like sometimes biological, as in they require some kinds of medications versus psychological and they don't, and there's more work one can do just on their thoughts and things like that? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, it's such a good question.
yeah.
More and more, one of the things that we're starting to see is the transgenerational transmission
Mm,
of the way in which we're impacted by life. That if our grandparents, for example, lived through the Holocaust, then our bodies have an increased reactivity to stress,
mm-hmm,
for example. So this question of biology becomes more and more expanded, deeper, more complex. And I used to say, try anything, try everything, do it all, do antidepressants, do hypnosis, do the Your Resonant Self material. Make sure, if you can, uh, see if there's some way to begin to exercise, yoga, just do it all, do whatever you can, whatever's available to you. Um, uh, and now I'm just thinking about a piece of research that showed that it was just as effective to have a filled prescription for Prozac in your medicine cabinet that you never take as it is to
mm-hmm,
take the Prozac. So,
mm-hmm,
and that might be safer because there's more and more coming out now about the problems of withdrawal from both benzodiazepines, which are the major class of anxiety treatment, and from um, this SSRIs, the
mm-hmm.
serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And And so I feel more wary than I used to, more worried than I used to about saying try everything. So I'm a little bit now more towards try everything else besides the medications in a very serious way before you try the medications.
Mm-hmm.
Try EMDR, try brain spotting, try yoga, try acupuncture, try, see what happens if you can exercise. Now, when I say try everything before you try the medications, um, I'm really saying try everything that's available to you. Because sometimes when people are really suffering from depression, the exercise option just isn't even remotely possible. And I'm not saying wait until you can do the not remotely possible things before you try your medications. No, I'm saying do what you can, and if you can't do anything else, then try the medications and see how they work.
Got it.
And then also be gentle with yourself in the withdrawal process and make sure it's medically supported for the withdrawals, because um, it's just harder on brains and bodies than we ever used to understand and know. And of course, this applies to all of the things we self-medicate with as well, because many of us self-medicate for anxiety and depression instead of doing the standard approach.
Yep.
And for that kind of addiction, we also need to be gentle with ourselves. And it's like a combination of gentleness and a stubborn hold on hope.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yep. That was good. Yes, gentleness and a stubborn hold on hope. I love that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, this has just been so enlightening and loving, and I totally feel your compassion and love towards this topic and yourself and everybody watching right now. So I really appreciate you
Oh,
doing this
thank
with us.
you.
Thank you so much for doing this and taking the time and for just clearly your passion for what you do, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Andy.
All right, everyone, thank you for your passion for yourself, for showing up here today, because that is, gosh, that's like a huge part of this is just showing up and tuning in. So we really
Absolutely.
love and appreciate you being here. And we'll see you on the next one, everybody. Take care. Hey everyone, I just wrapped up another beautiful class with Sarah Peyton. I really love Sarah. I love her work. I love her warmth, her compassion, the loving practices that she puts out into the world. I could really feel that during this latest class, and I hope you did too. She talked with us today about bringing warm comfort to the cold roots of our anxiety and depression. And she totally did that. She brought that warmth into this conversation so much. She talked about many things, and one of the things that I thought was just really a big take-home message was this state of alarmed aloneness, right, or alarmed loneliness. She talked about, right, our nervous system doing three things. The three things we typically think of when we're threatened, right, is to fight, flight, or freeze. Right. So she also talked about this other state called alarmed loneliness. And this is when we have a difficult time being in a certain scenario. Like, for example, she talked about if we tripped over something and we felt really alone and embarrassed, we would have this alarmed aloneness or something like that. Or we had difficult times being alone with like our thoughts or our emotions or all sorts of different things. So I thought this is a very human, right, human tendency, human state of being that I'm guessing most everyone watching right now can relate to in some way, shape, or form in their life. So just taking a look at that, where does that show up for you in your life, that alarmed aloneness? A couple of things I wanted to mention were some of the tools that she suggests you use if you're struggling with anxiety and depression are to hold yourself with warmth resonance, right? So hold yourself in this warm resonance. That's a big part of what she does in her work. Just start, like being nice to yourself, holding yourself with warmth, holding yourself with love, being kind and gentle with yourself, not being hard on yourself, talking to yourself in a loving manner. And she talked about how this actually grows your neurons, right? It grows neurons in your brain for you to practice this new way of being with yourself. And another great tip I thought she had was to use your own name when you talk to yourself. So she was doing that throughout this whole class. She kept saying things like, Sarah, do you need a little acknowledgement right now for how you feel about this? Or Sarah, do you need a little acknowledgement here for, oh, I was feeling depressed, or I'm feeling excited about this call, or all those kinds of things. So what would it be like to start using your own name when you talk to yourself? And I totally get it. When she said that, I'm like, wow, right. If we use our own names, it's a much more, to me, like a very personal experience, right? We're actually like building this loving relationship with ourselves. We're cultivating a warm, loving relationship with ourselves, just like we would be doing in a romantic relationship or in a relationship with our children, right? We're using their name or maybe their nickname or whatever in a loving way as we talk to them. So what would it be like if you started to use your name when you talk to yourself, when you're holding yourself in that warm resonance, when you're being gentle and kind with yourself? Last thing I wanted to mention was when she talked about depression specifically, she talked about depression being linked to this blockage of the seeking circuit. So the seeking circuit is this circuit in our brains where we get things done, where we create results, where we check things off our to-do list, where we actually are creating things to be happening in our world. So the big recommendation for her here was, in order to get out of that state of depression, we need to actually be able to see that we can have an effect in the world. And that was really beautiful. Right? I can totally get that, right? We need to be able to see that we have an effect in the world, as in we do this one thing and then we get a result. So whether it's vacuuming your floor and having the actual direct experience of, like I mentioned, dog hair or whatever it is, get sucked up into that vacuum. So you recognize that, wow, Andy, was able to, have an effect in this world, and here is the result that it created. And then she drew this parallel between us not being able to, or thinking we can't have an effect in this world when we're depressed, relating that back to that alarmed loneliness. So I thought that was a very powerful tie. So I would recommend you just kind of sit with that and chew on that for a little while. I thought that was really powerful and a great take-home message if you struggle with depression. So thank you again so much for showing up for yourself and for being here with us in this Avaya University class, and we will see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.